Edge, which I think Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, those are your top two. TJ Guy, I think if he's not your third, he'll certainly be your fourth. It's just kind of who that fourth guy, or in a right set of circumstances, third guy, winds up being. Thoughts on the contenders there? I know we've talked about Breon Ishmael. We've talked about Cam Brandt. We've talked about Emerick Kumba. Maybe there's a surprise somewhere, and a guy like Lugard Adokpaye comes in right off the street and is able to make some noise there. But thoughts on what they have there?
I think Dom Nichols has a legit shot.
I knew I was forgetting a name.
Yeah, the freshman who we talked about him last week, because Sharon Moore said he's probably the freshman I'm most excited about, and somebody who really showed out in the spring game. So I wouldn't rule him out. But yeah, all the names you mentioned, it feels pretty wide open. But as we have talked about before, the indications are that they feel pretty good about the depth at edge, despite there not being a ton of experienced players. So it makes you feel good. And one of the indications is Eno Edda moving to the inside and saying, yeah, that there are a lot of capable players on the edge. They wanted me to come in to tackle. We had, Rayshawn Benny hurt, some other depth concerns there. It'll give him a chance to play more. So I think there's more there than maybe would meet the eye initially, and don't rule out, some of those freshmen playing, like you said.
And I think it's pretty notable too that, when they were looking for transfer portal help, we never really heard about them targeting edge rushers. It was defensive tackles. JVR Suggs was one. I forget some of the names of the other guys that they were in on, but defensive tackle, and maybe that's where we move into that position now. Again, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, those are your starters. Rayshawn Benny, sounds like he's healthy and ready to go for fall camp. Edda's going to get some time there. Do we see any, is there really any snaps up for grabs here, or did the four I just named kind of going to be how it rolls?
I think Trey Pierce can earn some at nose if, you need to rotate a guy in, or if somebody is hurt for, a certain period of time. But beyond that, Ike Awuna, they talked a lot about in the spring. He hasn't played a single snap his entire career. Doesn't mean he can't do something now, but it feels like that speaks to maybe the concerns, because Trey Pierce missed time in the spring. Rayshawn Benny missed the entire spring with his injury that he suffered in the Rose Bowl. So they were kind of searching for other guys. So I think Rayshawn Benny being healthy, and Sharon said he'll work out the kinks maybe in the first week or two of fall camp. And then, as long as he's good to go and you have that top three, you can rotate them. They can all play both spots as they did last season. I think you're kind of rolling with that group. That's a damn good group. And when you're in base defense and you have another one of them on the field, those three all lining up together is a pretty tough trio to go against.
I agree with all that. A linebacker, top of the depth chart, Jayshon Barham, Ernest Hausman. No surprises there. That could be, even with what they lost, maybe the best linebacker duo in the Big Ten. Going to be a lot of fun to see how those guys fare. Behind them, though, you've got Jimmy Rolder, you've got Jaden Hood competing for spots in the 2 deep, and you have one of your guys, really both of our guys, or say both of us are in on this guy, Cole Sullivan, the true freshman, who continues, the stock on him just continues to go up and up every time we talk to someone.
Yeah, and when we talked to Max Bredesen and Jack Tuttle together on the show last week, they said that dude's gotten huge fast, like over the summer, and he already looked pretty big. Maybe not as filled out as he's going to be in the spring. Now they say he's much bigger, and as Max Bredesen said, you weren't really hearing much about Cole Sullivan early on in spring ball, but by the end, you could literally hear him hitting dudes. And again, it just continues to grow, the hype for Cole Sullivan. I think it's well deserved as well, based on what he showed in the spring game and what his teammates now are saying about what his abilities are. So he's one. And then Micah Pollard, you can't leave him out as well. Sharon Moore said he's had a big offseason and has gotten much bigger himself. That's always been the thing with him, is just adding a little bit more weight. And if he's done that, then he should be right in the mix. He's a really good special teams player. And he was turning heads in his freshman fall camp too. There was their first scrimmage at the Big House. Coming out of it, it was like Micah Pollard is the real deal. He hasn't shown it yet on defense. He's had some really talented players ahead of him, but he's somebody that could add some depth there too. So maybe less concerned about it. The depth at linebacker now that Jimmy Rolder's a little healthier and Pollard's coming on, and you have Cole Sullivan as well.
Yeah, a couple of folks asking in the chat, is Sullivan a stand-up edge or a linebacker? He's a linebacker. I think when you look at him, from an archetype standpoint, probably pretty similar to what I think they could use him as an edge rusher at some point, but I think he's kind of in that the Jayshawn Barham mold. So might have to wait his turn a little bit. We'll see how long Jayshawn Barham's at Michigan. Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Does he go to the NFL after this year? We don't really know, but feel really good about the short and long term, what they have at linebacker. Let's move to cornerback. We actually have a big time one in terms of starting cornerback job. We know Will Johnson's going to hold down one side of the fort there. Number 2 job up for grabs. Jerome Moore said, actually, I won't say like Jerome Moore kind of came right out and said, like, entering fall camp, Jair Hill is a guy they consider a starter, especially in that number 2 role. So you've got the Albany transfer, Amir Hall, in the mix there. Ricky Johnson transfers in from UNLV. Jaden McBurrows is still kind of lurking as a guy who could play some on the inside, play some on the outside. He factors into that battle as well. But for as much as we want to call it a position battle, true sophomore seems to kind of lead without, there's room for other guys to step in. But I was kind of surprised to hear him, Sharon Moore, kind of speak of him as a guy that they consider one of their starters at the moment.
Yeah, it'd be hard for Amir Hall to just be pegged as a starter coming in without having practiced it all yet. So I think that he's going to have his shot. And I think we probably see multiple guys play there. They were doing that a little bit more early last season. And then Josh Wallace just kind of became the guy, never got hurt, stayed on the field quite a bit, and ended up being really trustworthy for them and one of the big time players on Michigan's team. But yeah, I think Jair Hill with Amir Hall being the stiffest competition on the outside. And then on the inside, can Zeke Berry, translate what was a great spring into a great fall camp, earn that job, stay healthy, and fend off the likes of Jaden McBurrows. And I do wonder, too, with Wink Martindale coming in from the NFL, where are they going to be? Because Zeke Berry has talked about how he'll play safety and nickel, and he doesn't know what the split is going to look like at this point. But could they go with a more traditional, like before nickel became an every down player, where you spin down a safety, you bring another one in this certain situation, you bring a second or a third corner in another situation? Like it might be, depending on what they feel like they have there, it might be something like that, where it's not an every down nickel, but it's Zeke Berry sometimes, it's Jaden McBurrows at other times based on situation. So I don't know. We talk to Wink Martindale tomorrow, so that'll be interesting to hear more about it. But yeah, it feels like there's going to be some really good competition in the secondary, and you lose Rod Moore to injury. Mikey Sanders still's in the NFL. Josh Wallace is in the NFL, and there are still a lot of names back there that you feel like could factor in. And I'm sure we'll talk about safety here in a second, so that kind of leads right into it.
Safety is fascinating because Makari Page, I think you can pretty safely pencil him in as one of your quote unquote starters. But when you look at the snap counts from last year, they had 4 guys that basically played a starter's amount of snaps, or at least a similar amount of snaps. They're going to play 3 safeties. They're going to rotate 4 safeties. And that's where, what they did in the transfer portal with adding Wesley Walker and Jaden Mangum and then getting Quentin Johnson back for a 6th year. You really do kind of fortify the depth. And, in terms of guys like a guy like Walker, who I think probably hasn't gotten talked about enough as someone I think who could be a major player on this defense. Jaden Mangum, probably needs to improve his tackling a little bit, but he plays like he's shot out of a cannon. Quentin Johnson has made some of the biggest plays of your national championship season last year. And Makari Page is just as rock solid as it gets. So really, it's not a question of who starts there, because it's similar to edge, where they're going to rotate a ton of guys. A lot of guys are going to play a lot of football, and they're going to show a lot of different looks with them too. But I guess maybe we know what Makari Page is, but when it comes to maybe that next guy to watch in fall camp, who's the guy that you're most interested in?
Most interested in? I think Wesley Walker, probably, just because, I wouldn't necessarily say he has the edge coming in to start at free safety, but you also think of Quentin Johnson comes back with experience, but he's never earned a starting role, right? And I think it was huge to get him to come back. But, clearly there's something there where other guys have been able to edge him out. Wesley Walker comes in with even more experience. He was at Louisville for the spring, but spent time at Tennessee before that. I think Georgia Tech before that, right?
Correct.
So, he's been in college football for a long time. I guess we could go back to the Jack Tuttle thing, right? Is that a great thing? But, they seem to really like him based on what Sharon Moore said about a month ago. And I think that he's going to be one to watch. I think Jaden Mangum has always been a guy who's really athletic, wiry, fast, quick, had several interceptions last year for Michigan State. Can he be a little bit more physical? I think to hold up in this defense, I think is the big question. I think it's always been the question about Jaden Mangum, even going back to his time as a recruit. So, but there are options. And I think to your point, Anthony, about, they played these four guys, a similar amount of snaps, or they had four safeties that played a lot last year. Part of that was because of injury. And I think they understand how common that can be, on the back end. A guy gets dinged up, a guy hurts a knee, somebody else has to come in. It was, the national championship game when Makari Page was limited and Keon Sabb had to play a huge role. And then there you go. Keon Sabb makes some massive plays for Michigan to beat Washington and win a national title. So the season could be even longer this year. I think they realized after spring ball they had to do something about the depth at safety and in the secondary in general, and they have done that. And now you feel pretty good. It's going to be competition, but you feel like whoever wins those jobs is going to fare pretty well.